Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Open Up the Workforce, where we speak with executives driving the future of work and a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today's episode is a little different than usual. We'll be interviewing 3 guests from Oyster, and I'm incredibly excited to introduce Kim Rohrer, Principal People Officer, Matt McFarlane, Senior Director, People Experience, and Eryn Marshall, Senior Director of Global Recruiting, a trio that supports D&I initiatives at Oyster. Thank you all for joining us today. We'd love to start off with a round of intros. Kim, can we start off with you? Will you share a little bit more about your career story?
I would love to. So, Kim Rohrer, Principal People Partner at Oyster. I like to describe this role as being like a principal engineer, but for people stuff. So I help inform our strategy, our vision for how we execute on people things across the company, our workplace senior leadership team in executing their visions across their teams, as well as overseeing a lot of our DEI work. My career story is very long and winding, but I started out in theater and eventually found my way into tech. I've been in the people leadership space for about the last 15 years, a variety of tech startups, mostly in San Francisco. Oyster is my first globally distributed, fully global remote experience, and it has been a wild ride. It's been almost 2 years now.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing. And speaking of global, actually, we'll pass it next over to you, Eryn, to learn a little bit more about your career journey.
Hi, I'm Eryn Marshall. I'm the Senior Director of Recruiting at Oyster. And like most people, I accidentally fell into recruiting. I'm the first person in my family to ever go to college, and I had no idea how to navigate the world of careers. So pretty early on, I realized that if I didn't have a network, I was not going to end up in the career world. I was going to be in these sort of low-wage, low-growth jobs, which is what I did right after college. And I doubled down on the network, found my way into recruiting, and have been here ever since, really. So after I got into the recruiting world, I got another referral into a tech company, ended up in a very successful hyper-growth tech company with an acquisition, which gave me some amazing global recruiting experience, and then led me to lead talent acquisition functions for a couple of different startups. Now at Oyster for about 18 months, where we have hired about 630 people in that time in over 70 countries worldwide. So it's been a lot of fun. As Kim said, a wild ride.
Wow, that is very wild and super impressive. And how full circle that you began your career focusing on access to opportunities. And I know that you're very much doing that with the work that you do today too. Matt, would you also share a little bit more about your story as well?
Absolutely. So my name is Matt. I'm the Senior Director of People Experience at Oyster. I'm based in Brisbane in Australia, where I've spent my entire career. I started out I've had a career in what was HR. I'm trying to work towards changing the name to more something people focused, but yeah, in people experience where I find myself now. It started out in industries like manufacturing and a lot of different professional services firms before finding my way to technology, which is where I've spent my career ever since. So yeah, it's been amazing being able to bring some of the practices and learnings from those other industries and experiences to one as unique as Oyster, where Eryn said we've had a crazy history and a crazy ride.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate how multi-faceted your team is, all the different backgrounds and experiences that you all bring together. Kim, can you give us a high-level overview of Oyster's D&I goals and your broader strategy? What has the results that you've seen? Have you achieved them? How have they grown? Can you share more?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about D&I goals and Oyster as a global company is I think when we start talking about D&I goals, we tend to approach it from this very US-centric lens. It's a very US-centric way of thinking about D&I, because that's how this conversation has evolved in the tech industry. But globally, you have to think about things very differently. And because of our mission and because of our focus on helping to build up the talent ecosystem and accessibility to jobs and making it easier for companies to hire people all over the world, we tend to think about D&I in a more globally holistic sense. And we think of it not just in terms of the kind of the standard metrics of race and gender and sexual orientation that you see in the US, but looking at global economic status and diversity of geography and language diversity and things like that as other elements of this very multifaceted D&I practice. We've only really started to be able to collect data on this in the last 6 months or so, because it took us a while to formulate what is our philosophy and how do we actually make this philosophy whole in real life and not just nice words on paper. We look at inclusive communication, we look at accessibility, we look at inclusion. Language is one of the biggest ones. That's like my little fun fact is we did our first global D&I anonymous survey, and we found out that half of our team speaks English as a second language or third language. We only have about 50% of the company that speaks English as their primary first language. And when you look at a company makeup like that, it really lets you think differently about how you communicate and how people are receiving your communications. And that touches on inclusivity and accessibility and equity and all these wonderful things that we like to talk about through a lens that's not traditionally looked at when you think about inclusion. So it's been really interesting to be able to take that lens and apply it. About half of our company is women, but we also don't really know what the racial makeup of our company is because many of our employees live in countries where we're not legally allowed to ask that question, while many of our employees live in countries where we have to ask that question. So as we kind of grapple with the balance between compliance and our own desires for inclusion and data tracking for equitability, we really have to figure out what do we want and what is actually feasible and what can we do within the parameters of mismatched global compliance regulations around privacy and personal information.
That is so fascinating. I feel like I could talk to you for hours about that because we've been building out dashboards. And it's been so fascinating what we're allowed to ask and not ask, especially as we have some global customers who are based maybe here, but locations everywhere. And I think that what you said about that global aspect is so important. When we started building Simba, I was fortunate to be a fellow with late Congressman John Lewis. And in his office, he brought 20 fellows from around the world. I was one of the ones representing the US. And I always thought, diversity and inclusion is really only a US problem. But it was fascinating to learn about how different countries speak about diversity, equity, inclusion in Australia, in Holland. And it really opened up my mind at such an early age. So I really appreciate that you brought that up. Now, kind of shifting a little bit, Eryn, I'd love to understand thinking through the recruitment strategy. Now that you have you're borderless, you're global, you talked about hiring so many people so quickly. How has it been challenging and how have you maybe overcome some of these challenges and turned them into opportunities?
When you have the entire globe to source talent, you would think that that would make things easier. And to your point, there are a lot of challenges that come along with that. Being a remote company is incredibly attractive. And so a lot of people are interested in working for Oyster, not only because they're remote, but because employee centricity is something that we stand for. And so we're lucky that we get a lot of interest, and it can actually lead to longer lead times in hiring and more difficulty in finding the right candidate. So we need more resources because because there's people from all over the world with different backgrounds, resumes, CVs look differently, schools are different, jobs and types of companies they've worked for are maybe not recognizable. We have to review a lot more candidates in order to get down to the right one for the role at the right time. And it also requires a lot of education on the recruiter's end to the hiring managers about what good looks like in a global environment, because you can't pattern match. You can't rely on some old tactics that you used in the past in order to quickly fill roles. So that's been one of the biggest challenges. But I would say in terms of turning it into an opportunity, it really has allowed us to educate people throughout the company on, again, like what good looks like when you can't recognize it at first glance.
Thank you. I think that also makes you more intentional, right? When you hire, especially for us as a baby company compared to you, we are very intentional and go through a lot of processes and we don't try to rush it. So I think that hopefully is also a good outcome, that you make really strategic and effective hires from that process as well. Matt, you helped the company scale as well, over 3x across 70 countries in just 12 months. Would love to get your perspective on how you fostered an inclusion and belonging during this time of hypergrowth.
Yeah, so to build on what Kim and Eryn have been saying, when you have this, from my perspective, this competitive advantage, which is that you can hire people anywhere in the world, and we see the diversity of workforce that brings with it. The starting point that we're at as a company is so different from what any other traditional organization might be, when so many of our people can look around the organization and see people that they can relate to in so many different ways and with so many different paradigms. So I think from the get-go, we've had a really incredible foundation and base to start from as a business, and then thinking about a couple of ways in which we've tried to foster that in an ongoing manner. So, I mean, one, just from a purely structural perspective, is looking at things like job levels. So internally, what is my place within the organization? How are we making sure that we've got standardization and consistency, and we're able to surface some of the insights that come along with that, so that people feel like we're not just diverse as a company, but then when it comes to a lot of the structural and systematic ways in which the business works, that it kind of falls over. So that's one really key critical way in which we try to foster those things. And then the other, on a more social level, is that by virtue of being completely distributed, is that we operate in the cloud. That's kind of the office for us. And so in that environment, we have a lot of different affinity groups and channels. We even have a channel within Slack called New Channel, so that people who are creating these new groups can billboard that and make sure that they can find others who share some of those affinities with them. But in terms of how we try to build inclusivity there, I mean, we have channels to the most incredible things. I mean, one of them was for someone who, for example, missed the fact that they could wear these incredible outfits to work. And so they wanted a place where they could showcase what their work from home office wardrobe looked like. So things like that, all the way through to a mental health channel where we have people that are so vulnerable and so incredible in terms of like sharing and helping others across some of those journeys. And that's actually a channel that our CEO quite frequently visits and posts in and is quite vulnerable and transparent himself. So to see from the top to everywhere else in the business, that level of inclusivity practiced is I think some of the really key critical ways in which we've seen inclusion and belonging be a real cornerstone of Oyster as we scale.
That's super helpful to understand that. And I can honestly just imagine the energy that your culture has if you have a new channel, like how much people are excited about jumping in and supporting these initiatives. And it is important, especially in a remote environment, that you have that culture that embraces that connectivity and that attitude. I think Kim's insight earlier that half of your team is English speaking as a second language, that paints a really vivid picture to me as someone who grew up in a multicultural household, spoke Farsi and multiple languages. I appreciate that insight. When we were digging, our team learned a little bit about your mission squad, which is a cross-cultural team of employees responsible for aligning existing work with your mission and exploring new mission-driven projects. So Kim, can you share a little bit more about the mission squad and maybe some of the projects that they've worked on and the impact?
Yeah. So the mission squad is a very scrappy, self-led group of people. Everyone who is a part of it is kind of dedicating little bits and pieces of their time where they have it to work on projects because of their strong belief in our mission and the value that it brings to our customers and our company as a whole. There have been projects like tracking where we are hiring, where our customers are hiring across 3 different geographic kind of indexes that our people experience team has helped to formulate around. That could explain it better than I can, but it's a combination of things. It's not just cost of living or kind of economic standards, economic success. It's built based on the Human Development Index. We've kind of benchmarked all countries in the world to one of these 3 categories, and then we're able to track the financial impact that we're having based on where our customers are hiring. So we can say we have put this much money into developing countries by hiring people and encouraging our customers to hire these people in these developing markets. So that was something that came out of the mission squad. They built dashboards. They built these kind of how would we track that? How would we measure that? And then that cuts across product and customer success and sales and finance. It cuts across all these different parts of the company. And it's a really tangible way for us to measure the value of the impact of the work we're doing. And then there's other things that are a little bit lighter. Actually, someone just posted today, because we also have a channel, not just for the Mission Squad, but we have a Slack channel called Ask Mission Squad, where people who are not a part of the crew can suggest ideas. And someone just came, and she's 2 days back from her year-long parental leave. And she sent a message to me asking if it was too soon for her to post something. I was like, no, it's fine. She's like, I'm just really excited. It's my second day back, but I had this idea to run it by the Mission Squad. And she was saying, we have these volunteer days. Everyone has a certain number of hours per year that you can spend paid to take time off to volunteer. It doesn't come out of your PTO balance. And she was saying, what if we could connect our volunteer time off with partners around the world that help educate job seekers? And what if we could partner with low income earners or low wage earning jobs to help people turn into careers in tech? And we could do mentoring or career coaching or resume building or things like that. And we could connect Oysters with these kinds of opportunities that they could use their volunteer time off for. It's like, that's a great idea. Let's see if we can run with it. And so the Mission Squad does things across the board, whether it's this would be a fun way for us to encourage utilization of a benefit or a perk, or let's find a really tangible metrics oriented way to demonstrate the value.
Those are such great stories. And I'm smiling over here because, first of all, 1 year parental leave, sign me up for that. That's an incredible policy, and so warm to hear that when someone gets back, they're so excited with new ideas to share and contribute back to your team. I think that speaks to the culture that you've been able to cultivate. And it's really, really incredible. I know you mentioned that Matt might have some to chime in. So I'll pass the mic over to you, Matt, if you'd like to share more.
Yeah, so the area that Kim was speaking to is related largely to our compensation philosophy. And so the way in which we look to compensate people around the world. So this is born from a real challenge that Eryn and I face, well, all of us face, I guess, in the early days of Oyster, which is that when you can hire someone anywhere in the world and you don't know where you're going to be based until you're ready to make that offer, how do you know what is a fair and reasonable salary to offer that person? Are they asking for something that's actually lower than their worth, or are they asking something that's higher than potentially what might be right for the market? So that was a really critical issue for us at the start of the start of Oyster, and the way in which we've been able to solve that problem in a manner that kind of meets our mission is by basically carving the world up into three groups. So it focuses on high, middle, and low, effectively cost of living approximately locations. And so with that, we look to offer salaries very differently to market to each of those three different areas. So for our high tier of countries, we usually like Australia or the US or the UK, quite developed, wealthy nations, we look to offer around the middle of the market, and then we increase from there. So as we get to more developing nations, we actually offer towards the top of the market because we're really looking to unsuppress the traditionally low salaries there. And I think something that I always love to reflect on as a point of thinking about the impact that we're having is that if every one of our customers and every company in the world were to apply a comp philosophy like ours, we would actually see salary parity across the world. Because of course, if you're offering at top of market in some areas, it eventually lifts that ceiling. And so it's a nice way to think about the impact that we're having. And to Kim's point, we can really easily track what some of those countries might ordinarily expect to earn for a particular role in their salary, and look at the ways in which we're helping lift some of the salary ceilings there.
Thank you for sharing that. When I think of when we're able to actually speak to the metrics and really unveil and create transparency on the impact of HR, that's such a perfect example, and really appreciate the work that you're doing there. In the same line of metrics, I would love to understand from you, Eryn, a little bit about your perspective from global recruiting and D&I. What are some of the most important data metrics that are important to you, and how do you maybe guide these in your decision-making process?
Great question. And I think what Matt just talked about is one of the guiding sort of metrics for us. So as we have split the countries up around the world into these three groups, we measure which country we're hiring in, and we aim to hire basically 80% of our talent outside of these sort of high tier countries and cities. And that really is directly aligned to our mission of bringing more opportunity equity throughout the world. So we measure that. And then, as Kim mentioned earlier, we have about 55% female identifying folks in the company. So looking at that balance, as well as the number of countries that we're hiring in. So the diversity of actual nationality versus versus race is something that we look at. And then some of the more qualitative things that we are thinking about in terms of process and data, the way that we run our interviews, we run an incredibly structured interview process because we want to debias our decision-making as much as possible. So every candidate for a role will have the same exact interview process, same exact interview questions, so that we're measuring literally apples to apples. Somebody's ability to perform in the interview is based on the same things every single time. And that's allowed us to quickly make hiring decisions and hopefully effectively and objectively. We didn't speak to this at all, but we have a really high offer acceptance rate. That's something that we look at. And our retention rates also are incredibly high. And I think that I would like to think that part of that is due to the due diligence we do on the front end in our interview process.
That's helpful to understand. And I genuinely wish I had more time with all three of you because I've been learning so much and want to dig into more. But we are coming up on our last question, which is something we ask all of our speakers on this show around our mission, which is open up the workforce. To us at Simba, that means equitable access to job opportunities and wealth creation. We'd love to do a round robin. We'll first pass it over to you, Kim. What do you think needs to happen next for us in order to open up the workforce?
So the biggest thing for me, and this is highly biased towards my own personal experiences, but I think making the workforce more accessible for caregivers and for neurodiverse populations, I think is kind of the next frontier. We really pride ourselves at Oyster on asynchronous, nonlinear, flexible scheduling, and that benefits people with disabilities, that benefits caregivers, that benefits neurodiverse populations, that benefits people, marginalized populations all over the place. And I think that to me is like the big lesson we can take from these pandemic years and into this new frontier of work is making the workplace more accessible to populations that are not fitting that ideal worker model.
Thank you for sharing, Kim. And I couldn't agree more. And I think that remote and global aspect of the work you do is hopefully empowering that to also exist at Oyster. We'll pass it over to you, Eryn, and then Matt to wrap us up.
One of the things I think when we talk about wealth creation is financial literacy. I think that's something that even if you are giving people access to opportunity and the ability to make more money, if they don't have financial literacy and education, the chances of them actually creating wealth and being able to do that for generations to come is definitely lower. And so that's what I would like to see. It's sort of, Kim talked about the next frontier, maybe the next frontier of benefits is really how do we get people the financial education they need to be able to do things, anything from basic budgeting to investing so they can actually retire beyond the basics of what we know, which is your employer has a 401k, put money in if they do, if they don't, I don't know.
Nice. And then, look, I think from my side, like really simply is just recognizing that talent exists everywhere. I think just checking the assumptions and the long-held beliefs that I think all of us in some respects have, and certainly come into this new kind of global economy with, which is that you have to hire in the area that I'm in, and just recognizing that there's this entire world out there full of incredible people that are equally, if not more capable than the people that you're sitting next to sometimes, and that it doesn't, there's ways that you can do such incredible good. And I think there is so much opportunity for global wealth creation by accessing the global talent market. And it doesn't have to be something that is this costly thing. It's such an economic opportunity for not only the individual, but for the company as well, in the sense that you can unsuppress some of these really traditionally low salaries in these areas while accessing great talent and doing so that's still at a discount in some cases to what you might ordinarily hire for in your own local market. So I think just checking some of those kind of long-held biases that a lot of people have and just recognizing that whilst it does come with its own set of challenges, it ultimately does give you greater access to more talent and do the world a lot of good as well.
Appreciate all three of your perspectives and believe that if we could capture all of them, that is putting us in the right stage to ultimately open up the workforce from globally to access and in so many different ways, and long-term financial literacy. Couldn't agree more. We appreciate you for being on our show today and for the amazing impact that you're having all on a global scale. Thank you so much, Kim, Matt, and Eryn. We appreciate it.